back to your idea of Chekhov and form, because there's something about the compression and the length of this book that I would like to ask you about. But just to nail this, the timing thing, 1962 in even British literary culture is, in the immortal words, just before the Lawrence trial and the Beatles' first LP. But Britain and England is caught in that incredible embarrassment. We don't have sin, we have embarrassment. We have excruciating, kind of crippling shyness. And I'm assuming that England and Englishness is in some way a great gift to novelists because of the restraints, because of the stuff that isn't ever said.
I think it's absolutely right. Although I must demur a little. I mean, I go around a fair bit, and there are shy people all over the world. I mean, let's be clear about this.
They don't apologise to things they bump into.
I'm not so sure. I've met shy Americans, for example. How about that? Beat that. I think it's a human trait, clearly. And can I just make a little divagation here into evolutionary theory? Clearly, there are niches for people who don't project themselves too strongly. They don't get mashed or beaten up, or they stay quietly in the background. And in that niche, there is some success. Who was the shyest scientist who ever lived? Charles Darwin. I mean, he never put himself about. What a success he was. So, I mean, I was a very shy child, so if you detect a degree of trumpeting for shy people, that's the reason. I think, though, that your assumption is correct. If the world was filled with people who just immediately told you exactly what was on their mind all the time, first of all, you'd go mad, but secondly, there would be no space for the novel, no space for concealment. And I think the English novel has thrived on those concealments, those embarrassments, the things that are not said but then reflected on later, the things that should have been said and are reflected on with a great deal of regret. It certainly is the case, too, that in 1962, England was not so extraordinarily different from the way it might have been in, say, 1932. We had not had a major shift of attitude, but it was on its way. And when it came in England, it came with a huge splash. I mean, disproportionately, we supplied the world's rock guitarists. I mean, and yet they didn't seem very shy. Where had they come from? It was like a sudden explosion. And I wanted to catch this before that moment, before the pill, before the loosening and warming of attitudes that we broadly refer to as the 60s, and which affected everyone, not just students in universities. It even affected my parents, I mean, in ways that they probably weren't fully conscious of. It filtered its way through the whole population, one way or another. Its lasting legacy, as far as I'm concerned, as well as the environmental movement and feminism and many other things, but I think it changed forever the way adults treat children. I think that changed in the 60s. But that's another subject. This was a good moment, 62.
62 also meant that your first sexual fumblings, your physical incompetence happens not as it might do now to 17-year-olds or 15-year-olds or 14-year-olds who are experimenting with their friends, but at a crucial moment of marriage, which is going to wreck the rest of your life, or has the capacity to.
I think, I mean, obviously, we're talking in massive generalities, but it was the case that for young people, if you wanted to have sex with a girl, first of all, you had to meet her parents, and then you had to marry her. And that is not called casual. That is not casual sex. There were many, many exceptions. Anyone who's read the novels of Kingsley Amis, or rather the biography of Kingsley Amis will know that, you know, he was no slouch in this field, and many others. And there were whole corners of society, bohemians, people already smoking marijuana in 1955, or, you know, people listening to Charlie Parker, or, you know, but these were small subgroups. On the whole, especially for middle class, lower middle class kids, you could easily go well into your 20s before your first sexual experience.
Can I just move away from the big generality for a second? Just talk about the size of this novel. It's almost a sort of, it's more than a long short story. It's like a novella, and I'm fascinated by what that allows you to do in terms of compression and poetry that is unlike a much bigger scale project like Atonement, say.
Well, I think of it as a novella. It is a novella. I heard someone on the radio say, it's not a novella, it's a short novel. Well, I thought that's what novella meant. I tell you exactly, in this day of computers, we know how long our novels are. It's 39,200 words long. When I set out to write it, I did what I always do. When I start to think of structure, I do a simple piece of arithmetic. And in this case, I knew exactly that it was 8 times 5. I mean, in other words, I was aiming for 5 chapters of about 7,000 or 8,000 words, and that's more or less how it came out. And I find that very helpful. It's almost as if before you start playing a game of tennis, you mark out the pitch, and you put the net there, and that's your freedom, actually. It's the freedom that a poet will describe when he or she decides to write a sonnet. You know, it's very certain there are 3 quatrains, there's a rhyming couplet. Once you decide on that, there is your freedom. It's set for you. Oh, that's great. Thank you. I think it's a brilliant length. I think the world is full of novels that are too long. Most novels never earn their 800 pages that are that long. It puts demands on the writer, and principally, I think it offers pleasures to the reader. We read Death in Venice long before we read Dr. Faustus these days. Kafka excelled in Metamorphosis rather, I think, than in America or The Castle. I think the novellas of Lawrence are some of the finest things that he wrote. Turn of the Screw. I would sooner have Henry James's Turn of the Screw than The Ambassadors any day. What does it force on you? First of all, an economy with characterization. You've got to get characters fixed quickly with an amazing economy. And you've got to push things to a conclusion. For the reader, it means an experience that's more or less like going to a play, 2 or 3 hours. You can read a novella in one sitting. Its whole shape is available to you all at once. So, no, I adore it. This is my 4th novella.